The Labor Day weekend sale is on at Tanger Outlets. Score up to 70% off at top brands like Nike Factory Store, Crocs, J. Crew Factory, Gap Outlet, and so many more. Refresh your wardrobe with the latest arrivals for less from all your favorite brands this Labor Day weekend. Tanger Outlets, always on trend, always on sale. Plan your trip at Tanger.com.
We're excited to announce that our very own podcasting platform, Zencastr, has become a new sponsor to the show. Check out the podcast's discount link in our show notes and stay tuned for why we love using Zen for the podcast.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 171. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my co-host, Paul Zimmerman. Today we discuss archaeological radiography with James Elliott. Let's get to it. Hey everybody, here's a little biography of our guest before we start the show. James Elliott is a lecturer in diagnostic radiography at Canterbury Christ Church University in the United Kingdom and a qualified archaeologist. He has a master's in forensic radiography and enjoys researching and the use of X-rays in archaeology with his research website, Paleoimaging.com. And you can find that link in the show notes. On to the show. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast. Paul, how's it going?
It's going all right. Not a whole lot new to report this time. Just spent a lot of time over the last week or so doing a fair amount of GIS work for an NSF grant proposal that I'm getting written into. But aside from that, I don't think I have anything really to chat about today. How are you doing? Where are you now?
Well, we are actually, and our guests can appreciate this, we are in Lake Havasu City, Arizona at an RVing event, our first ever RVing rally, so to speak, where they're doing talks and all kinds of stuff. And it's been really fun because from a tech standpoint, you know this because you worked with us over the summer, we had solar panels installed on the roof and lithium batteries. Well, there's different sections of RVers here, and we are down in the solar section where you're not allowed to run your generator or your engine. You have to have good power management or a lot of solar energy, and we've been doing pretty good. We're on day 5 or 6, I think. And I think we got here Saturday and we haven't run our generator once, but we've had to have some pretty strict power management practices to be able to do that. So it's been fun. It's been fun. I'm just glad to say that I have a number of, high amp batteries in order to run some things. So we charge those up when we do have good battery power. And then like overnight and stuff, we can keep our phones on those other batteries that we use in the field. So It's been interesting. Yeah. We got a few more days to go too. So, and I said our guest would be able to appreciate this because about 5 miles away from me is the London Bridge. The London Bridge that was built, in the I think it was the early like 1830s or something like that, and they tore down the 600-year-old medieval bridge to build that bridge because it wasn't adequate anymore. And then in the mid 20th century, the London City Council was like, well, we need a new bridge because cars are a thing now. And we didn't really plan on that when we built this in the 1800s. So we need to structurally just rebuild this whole entire thing. And one of the city council people said, why don't we sell it? They're like, you're crazy. Who's going to buy that? Well, an American businessman from Missouri was crazy enough to buy it. He spent $2.5 million on the London Bridge, and they marked every stone so they could put it back together. They dismantled the London Bridge. They cut off about 6 to 8 inches of the facing on it to basically refresh the granite, and then shipped it over to Long Beach through the Panama Canal, trucked it over to Arizona, and basically put it around. They faced an iron girder bridge. So it's a really sturdy bridge, but it's got the London Bridge blocks surrounding it. And it's a super cool little area down there crossing a man-made channel that they made basically just to put this bridge over. And it's really interesting seeing that. So that was pretty fun. So leading into that, let me introduce our guest, James Elliott, who is, as I mentioned in the introduction, a lecturer in diagnostic radiography. James, welcome to the show.
Hi there. This is great to be with you guys. I've been listening for a long time. So thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Yeah. And this is especially cool because most of the time we get people on the show that are, well, I hate to put it bluntly, but archaeologists, right? That are using some sort of technology to do something. And, you know, you're background isn't, and education is not really in archaeology originally, right? So let's talk about how you got into archaeology, how you got interested in that, and then how that led to radiography, and then we'll talk about that later. Sure.
Well, I hate to break it to you, but actually, I did start out in archaeology. I did a degree in archaeology at Newcastle University quite some time ago. Qualified back in 2001.
That's right. Yeah.
2004. Sorry, and then I had real difficulties getting employment. So I looked at. I know. I looked at what other jobs there are out there, and I looked into healthcare. And in healthcare at that time in the UK, they were offering free pass for the tuition fees for radiography. So I thought to myself, you know what, this is probably a good stable job. I went into that, started working down in the south of England. But I always had that interest in archaeology. And so with radiography, we do use X-rays in archaeology, don't we? So I started putting the two together. And eventually I did a master's in forensic radiography, learning about how to use imaging to identify the deceased or look at objects, non-destructive testing. And then eventually the long winding road that is life, I found myself working at Canterbury Christ Church University. And now I'm really getting into my fore to research how X-rays or radiography is used in archaeology.
So in this podcast, we, of course, like to unpack any terminology that ourselves and possibly the listeners are not aware of. So let's talk about radiography, because that's what this whole podcast is going to be about. Can you explain to us what that is and what it's used for typically?
Yeah, sure. It's my day job at the moment. Teaching how people to become radiographers. The people come off the street and they do 3 years, and then they get their degree and they start providing medical care in our NHS.
You don't have 3 years. You've got 3 minutes. Go.
Fine. So radiography is the use of medical imaging in healthcare. And although there's also radiotherapy with therapeutic radiographers, unlike me, I'm a diagnostic radiographer. In the UK, a radiographer is a protected title, meaning you can't call yourself one without doing a degree first and being registered. So this involves all sorts of different types of technologies, not just X-ray. You've got CT scans and MRI and nuclear medicine and ultrasound. And my area of specialism in the NHS and the National Health Service is actually nuclear medicines, where you inject patients with radiation and then you kind of measure that with a gamma camera to find out about them, normally about how an organ works. So it's a big area. It's a big topic.
Nice. So basically anything you can use to look inside the human body without cutting them open.
Yeah. And they say that like 99% of the population will have imaging at some point during their life. I'm just wondering who that 1% is, because everyone at some point in their life will have some form of imaging and come into radiology department. Yeah, you would think. I think I had an X-ray last year. So, okay. Well, how did that all swing back around into archaeology then? Yeah, interesting, because I wanted to do archaeology, but it was more of a hobby. And then when I came into uni and had that the obligation to do research, I thought let's start collaborating with the archaeology guys, and then we went together to do teaching for the undergrads to show how X-rays are being used, and we started doing projects together, and that's really where I've gone now, sort of looking at how X-rays are used in archaeology with bones, with metalwork and ceramics.
Interesting. On your on the bio that you sent us, you have a link to your website, paleoimaging.com. And I went there, and you've got a lot of interesting information there, including a class. So we'll definitely put a link in our show notes for that. But you also have a description on the webpage about the use of the term paleoimaging. And I was hoping that you could explain for us and for the listeners what you mean by paleoimaging, and then how this radiography works within that overall term.
Yeah, paleoimaging, I've stolen from Beckett and Conlog. They did the Your Mummy Roadshow, didn't they? which is a show that was on National Geographic. They went around America scanning mummies and x-raying mummies and stuff. And they wrote a book, and in that book it says paleoimaging has been defined as the capture of images of cultural remains and artifacts, where for me it's a multitude of different imaging technologies are used non-destructively to gain information. And on the website I've got a little bit that says what is paleoimaging. And it says there are different types of imaging you can use. You can use X-rays, or you can use computer tomography, which is essentially taking an X-ray round in a circle and then using computing power to reconstruct images. Or you can use MRI, which is magnetic resonance imaging. But you've also got fluoroscopy, and it's very basic. Paleoimaging can include just using a camera, aerial photography, ground-penetrating radar. There's a vast array of different things that are out there, which I would consider to be within the bracket, the research field of paleoimaging.
So broadly speaking, then, paleoimaging could encompass any kind of imaging techniques within archaeology. And I guess to a greater or lesser extent, all of us archaeologists, regardless of our specialty, or almost all of us, are doing some form of paleoimaging. But again, circle back to what you're doing. You're especially specializing in X-rays, both as a practitioner of archaeo-paleoimaging and also then as a teacher of. Could you give us the quick elevator speech of what you're doing teaching paleoimaging, what you're doing about teaching radiography to other archaeologists or for archaeological purposes? Yeah,
that's a good question. So X-rays have many benefits, which I tell to the undergrad students, and I help out with some of the PhD students. It's non-destructive, non-invasive. When you use X-rays, you're not going to destroy the item, and you don't have to shove anything inside it. So it's non-invasive. There have been studies that looked into the effect of X-rays with DNA, ancient DNA, and to get to the stage where you're going to be destroying ancient DNA, you've got to be doing something incredible. Like, this is the Hulk kind of style of gamma rays, X-rays, getting through that item. So X-rays, just general X-rays, like your chest X-ray you had, Chris, that would not destroy the ancient DNA within some bones. So you have that ability to explore the inner structure of an item. But there's different ways. You have to get your head around it. An X-ray is a 2D representation of a 3D object. So that's where the radiographic science comes in.
Okay. So am I right then, because you anticipated one of the questions that I asked, that I put on our show notes for Chris. In medical applications, we're worried about getting too many X-rays in a given year, for example, because of the cancer risk. And what you're saying is that destroying the object or mummy or whatever you're looking at that is non-living, we don't have any similar sorts of worries. You're not going to destroy that ancient DNA that we might want to extract otherwise.
No, yeah. Even with this, like we do CT scans of mummies, don't we? I've done one quite recently on a mummy head from Canterbury Museums and Galleries down in Kent. Yeah, great fun. Yeah, I've got some pictures and there's some more stuff going on the website soon. Even with our what I call a full fat version of that CT, the smallest resolution, the highest amount of dose we can give, is nowhere near the amounts you would need to give to demonstrate damage to DNA. There's been a few studies on it.
Fascinating. I've always wondered.
So, but with living people, that's not the case. As radiographers in the UK, we would have to vet every X-ray request that comes through us to say, yes, this is justified and we are willing to do this for this patient, because people do ask for X-rays that are either unnecessary or undiagnostic.
That leads me to a thought too, because anytime, I'm a field archaeologist, and anytime we talk about some sort of technology, I'm always concerned with data collection and how we can best collect a piece of data or something like that in order to be able to study it in a certain way and not damage it for that future potential. So are there any concerns with field archaeologists collecting certain things, having to collect them in a certain way, being careful of certain practices that would, I guess, decrease your ability to collect information from some sort of radiographic method?
Well, I've had quite a few requests to have soil blocks X-rayed, and I've done a fair few. And there's a perception by some archaeologists that you can X-ray anything. And sure enough, with the powerful enough machine, you could. But with the stuff I've got, it goes pretty high. We've got clinical equipment at Canterbury Uni, and that gets through a lot of heavy stuff. But when you get to really heavy metals, you're going to struggle. You have to switch over to an industrial unit of some sort, which we don't have, but do exist. They are around. For the point of view of like, could you do anything wrong to an item? I think with the careful nature of any archaeologist, apart from a spade through something perhaps, or a fork through something, you can't do too wrong for it to be amenable to get to X-ray and get a good result. There's a saying in radiography which says one view is one view too few, meaning that if you take an X-ray from one angle, you need to take another one from 90 degrees for it to mean anything, because you need to be able to see the anatomy, in this case, it could be an object, it could be the internal structure from a different perspective to be able to really understand it.
That answers the question I was thinking about, because I didn't even think about X-raying like soil blocks or something like that, and thinking, I guess the more power you have, the deeper you can see, or the more you can see through, I should say. But I was wondering, like, I mean, if you just have one image straight down into the soil, you're probably not even going to be able to tell what you're looking at unless you take an off-axis image, and then you can compare those two and then start matching things up and say, well, here's this, because you might see a dense object at 10 centimeters and a dense object at 30 centimeters, but in the X-ray, they might look like they're just in the same spot, right? Because of the nature of the two-dimensional representation.
Yeah, that's true. And also, you have to think that out in the field, the thing that you're going to be X-raying is going to be on top of a detector. So you couldn't literally have it pointing at the ground, then see into the ground, because you need to have the film or whatever underneath it. But having said that, there are examples in literature about items being lifted as a block because they're so fragile that they need to be imaged as they are. Especially there's Egyptian items that have been done like that, and then they've been micro excavated to get rid of all the soil. And the X-ray or CT, the ironic thing is that sometimes, with some situations, you might want to perform imaging to prove that whatever the item was broken before you touched it. I know, yeah. Again, sort of Beckett and Condog, in one of their texts, they say that they went to X-ray some old priests or something standing up there in the church, mummified priests, and one way of saying that it wasn't me that broke them is you take an X-ray first to has that permanent record. And I think that idea of permanent record really resounds with archaeologists, because they like to document, and that's one way of doing it.
Nice. Well, that is a good spot to take our first break, and we'll be back on the other side to talk more radiography with James Elliott. Back in a minute. Chris Webster here for the Archaeology Podcast Network. We strive for high-quality interviews and content so you can find information on any topic in archaeology from around the world. One way we do that is by recording interviews with our hosts and guests located in many parts of the world all at once. We do that through the use of Zencastr. That's Zencastr. Zencastr allows us to record high-quality audio with no stress on the guest. Just send them a link to click on, and that's it. Zencastr does the rest. They even do automatic transcriptions. Check out the link in the show notes for 30% off your first 3 months, or go to zencastr.com and use the code Archaeotech. That's ARCHAEOTECH. Looking to expand your knowledge of X-rays and imaging in the archaeology field? Then check out An Introduction to Paleoradiography, a short online course offering professional training for archaeologists and affiliated disciplines. Created by archaeologist, radiographer, and lecturer James Elliott, the content of this course is based upon his research and teaching experience in higher education. It is approved by the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists as 4 hours of training. That's in the UK, for those of you that don't know. So don't miss out on this exciting opportunity for professional and personal development. For more information on pricing and course structure, visit paleoimaging.com. That's PALEO imaging.com, and look for the link in the show notes to this episode.
Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One with pico and creamy chipotle ranch, and the other with bacon and avocado ranch. Chicken expert since 1990. Taco expert since now. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
Welcome back to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 171, and we were talking with James Elliott all the way over in the UK about radiography and its use in archaeology. So when we ended the last segment, we were talking about a few soil blocks and things like that, and you mentioned a piece of equipment. That made me think, every time I've had an X-ray, it's been like in a room with a big thing that is not going anywhere, and the technician goes in another room, puts on I'm wearing a lead jacket. So what are the field applications of any of this, or are there field applications for some of these radiographic methods? Are there handheld devices or ways you can set something up that you can use this in the field, or do you have to, you mentioned getting dirt out from like a mummy or sarcophagus or something like that, implying that, perhaps this could be done in the field. Could you explain some of those techniques?
Yeah, sure. There are some pieces of equipment which are mobile, or you might call them portable. Think about all the people who are vets. The vets go out to the farms to do x-rays of whatever animal that needs to be done. So these portable equipments do exist, and other people have used either equipment used by the army, so it's rugged, it's able to travel. In the distant past, you'd have chemical film, so you need to worry about the supplies of either the film itself, the liquids that go with it, and then having a dark room always a bit of a challenge. Nowadays, we have digital radiography, and digital radiography, you use the same, like it's a film, but it's not a film. It's a digital film which could be used over and over and over. You don't need to worry about resources, the logistics of having film sent out to you, and you can take the fight to them. You can take your machine, you can go off there, you can do stuff. But these pieces of equipment are fairly expensive, and most archaeological, well, at least commercial units won't be interested in that. And it falls down to maybe research, universities who have it, and even then, there's only certain circumstances you can use them, but some people do have them. There's a few people in the UK who have this portable machine, which is standard practice in hospitals, because we've got to go to the wards. We've got to go up to ITU and take x-rays of very poorly people who can't come down to the radiology department. So they exist. So that is a very useful piece of equipment. The other thing is that we have dental x-ray machines, and those you see in the dentist, the ones that look like a gun, perhaps they hold it to your face and take an X-ray of your back teeth, perhaps. And there's ones that are wall mounted. So I'm talking about the ones that are handheld. There's machines called nomads, as it implies you can go wherever you want with them, and they've got a fairly sizable battery power. And there have been archaeological studies where they've used them in a novel way to look at bony anatomy, to identify pathologies in a very small scale and very accessible for researchers and other people.
God, I guess that just reminds me, dental technology, man, it seems to be growing in leaps and bounds. I was at my dentist just last December getting a crown, and they used a device that they put into my mouth, and I could hear it going tick, 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 and clicking off these images really fast. And they were in real time taking images and processing on a screen that I could see 3D color photogrammetric images of my teeth. It was highly disturbing how accurate it was. It was crazy. Yeah.
Technology moves on quickly.
Oh man, so crazy. Paul, I think you may have had a question.
No, I was just thinking that it's fascinating that I hadn't even thought of portable X-ray machines as a potential tool in the field archaeologist toolkit. Obviously expensive, specialized, but I was kind of curious about the specialized because again, back to your role as an educator, what kind of training would be involved in teaching somebody how to use this kind of equipment archaeologically?
I'd say there's two types of training that you have to consider. You have to consider the training of being safe with radiation, because the danger of radiation, all radiation could cause cancer, and that's always a concern. So in the field, when you have an X-ray source which can, in theory, shoot anywhere, you could expose someone to radiation that they don't need, and that's obviously dangerous. It's all it could be accumulative radiation, which is bad, or say there's a risk called stochastic risk, which means any radiation could cause cancer. So that's one aspect. There's radiation protection to be considered. And the second thing is about the knowledge of how to take good X-rays, a bit like a photographer. There are variables involved, and there are views, radiographic projections of views that are optimal for certain types of anatomy. Or if you're not talking about anatomy, you're talking about an object, you've got to know how to manipulate the exposure factors evolved to gain the best possible image for that item. And with digital radiography, you have that blessed opportunity to take as many X-rays as you like, because it's digital and you're not going to waste any film. But if you don't, then it's a bit of a risk, isn't it?
So I'm assuming that it's not just raw trial and error when you're working with the different variables to get a good image. I'm assuming that there's a fair amount of expertise that goes into you in particular, having done this in the past. What are some of the variables that we'd run into that somebody would have to learn? And in the same way you use the analogy to photography, one needs to know about ISO and aperture and shutter speed. What would be the kinds of variables that go into a good radiograph?
I think you could use photography quite well as an analogy. X-rays, they have a strength. So you will be shooting those X-rays, and some of them will be, let's say, weak, and some of them will be strong. If you want to get through a very dense object, you need to have strong X-rays, and you need to control the quantity of X-rays. So if you want to have lots and lots of X-rays to get through, you need to expose for longer. So the strength would be the voltage of the tube, and the quantity will be the tube current. And those two variables, some of them you'll be pretty much standard for. You can use clinical numbers, clinical settings, and you can think, yeah, this is about a knee X-ray in the clinical environment for this piece of whatever I'm using. I'll probably use that. But there are other variables as well, like the distance in between the object and the detector or the film, the distance in between the object and then the tube, the X-ray tube, and then the angle it is, all sorts of things. It is a specialism, and I think the more you get into a specialism, the more geeky you get, and any photographer will probably be the same.
You've talked about objects and X-raying certain things, and we're talking in radiography in general. To be honest, when most people probably think of X-rays, they think of bones, right? I want to see bones. I want to see inside. What are some of the things that radiography, and I think more specifically X-rays, because it's very interesting to me, what are some of the things you can, look at or look into using X-rays that we may not be thinking of?
I think I can draw upon my experience of working with a lady called Dana Goodburn Brown. She's a conservator in the Southeast, and she's been very good to me. She's brought me lots of nice things to X-ray. I know, it's great, isn't it? Once you say you've got an X-ray machine and you're willing to do that for them, they just flock around you. They really want to have stuff X-rayed.
Nice.
We've done Bronze Age axes. The Bronze Age axes come from a hoard. For the life of me, I can't remember the name of the hoard. And that's really, really useful because we can look at the internal structure of that Bronze Age axe, or there was a whole bunch of them. Bronze Age axes, we can see the size of the cavity in the inside, the way that it's been set, whether there's different ways that the bronze has set, and whether we can mimic it with some experimental archaeology in the future. We've also done Anglo-Saxon swords, whether they're sort of fragments or whether they're complete. That'd be really good to see either the state of preservation or the state of decay. I've done Tudor corsets, so Tudor England corsets, to see how they're constructed from the inside, and then a whole plethora of other weird and random items from a museum, everyday items, just to see how are they made. This is made in the Victorian age. What's inside them? How do they work? So that's the kind of stuff I've been doing. Done a lot of pots. A lot of pots from the portable antiquity scheme in the UK, where they want to find out, is there any treasure inside, so I can claim it as a treasure. This is the metal detectorists, and I haven't found any gold yet, but they're always very willing to come to me. They'll bring like either a bronze urn or a ceramic urn, or an X-ray inside, and hopefully see like nice round coin. But most of the time, it's just little jumbled up pieces of bone.
You're saying people bring you stuff to X-ray, which is fantastic. It makes me think of a YouTube channel. There's a number of them, right? There's one I think it's called Will It Blend? Like they'll put an iPad in like an industrial blender or something like that. There's one where I know there's a guy that's using like an industrial, like a press, and he'll just crush stuff to where it's like completely flat. And that's just like, you just watch it because it's fascinating. I'm telling you, you got to have on part of your YouTube channel. I see it linked on your website here, but you need to have a whole series called What's Inside of It. And just, you don't even need to explain anything. Will it X-ray?
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, we've done like shields and all sorts. There's random little pieces of metal in Britain. When you dig down a couple of inches, you'll find loads of stuff, and some of it's metal. And then in the end of the day, the archaeologist sort of scratches his head and goes, "I've got like 30 kilograms of metal. Do we need to keep any of it? And the museum goes, I'm not sure.
You said shields. What would you see in like inside of like a shield? Like, what can you even see? Like a wooden shield, I guess you could see nails or something, right?
Yeah, the wooden part would be gone, but there might be rivets, or there might be the boss, and to show the construction of that, just wonderful. That's a very much industrial radiography kind of mindset, away from the clinical mindset. But the opportunity to see that, and you don't often get that opportunity in my line of work, although it's becoming more frequent now. As I say, people know about me and they come to meet me, and we X-ray stuff together. And I just really enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. As my colleague Adelina Tiwaka from Canterbury Archaeological Trust, she brings me loads of stuff. And I said to her, "Have you got any more interesting stuff to X-ray?" And we X-ray together. And she says, "That is the point. The magical point where you're the first person ever to see the inside of that item."
Yeah.
Right there and then, standing in that room. And she said, "That's for me. That's the point of magic. That's the little bit."
No, that's great.
Nice. I want to get probably in segment 3, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the projects you've worked on and some of the more interesting things that you think you've, some of the stuff you've worked with. But I'm curious, as archaeologists, we always get the question, what's the coolest thing you've ever found? Or, if they don't know what they're talking about, have you ever found any dinosaur bones? But in the vein of what's the coolest thing you've ever found, have you ever imaged something or analyzed a series of images, and like as the picture resolves, you're just like, what the heck is that? Or something that was just completely unexpected, or just I don't know. I'm trying to think of stuff that would just be like a doctor imaging somebody and saying, why is there a telephone inside of your abdomen? That kind of thing. But
you mean archaeological, not clinical?
Yes. Yes.
I can regale with all sorts of things. The clinical.
Oh no! We don't need that right now.
life.
This is a family channel.
Okay, so the most exciting thing that I've seen of late is taking initially just the X-rays of the ancient Egyptian mummified head from Canterbury museums and galleries. So they have this head which is unwrapped, because about the Victorians, they love to have their unwrapping parties. So it's one of those that's being collected in the Victorian time, given to the museum eventually. We X-rayed it, and inside, and this is also shown in the CT scans, which again, some videos I'll put on eventually, there's some very odd tubes being shoved up the spinal canal, and also down something the left nostril, and they kind of almost meet in the middle, so it's shoved right up. They pushed out away some anatomy out of the way, and we think that I think maybe they used it as some sort of stand, but it looks old, it looks brown, it looks dated, and it looks, I think, maybe Victorian. I think that's why, and it looks so odd and so brown and old. We didn't see it initially until we did the imaging.
Wow, that's crazy. I'm blown away by that imaging. Like, I don't know, because there's not any other way that you would even know something like that, right? Because people aren't just cutting some of this stuff open as a matter of course. And in fact, in a lot of cases, I would think back to, say, Native American remains that have been analyzed in disputed fashion here in this country, where I'm not sure some sort of radiography would satisfy some Native American tribal concerns about invasive procedures and things like that. I'm not really sure how they would feel about that. It'd be interesting to have that discussion with some tribal groups, but I feel like that those sorts of techniques should be in more, I guess, wider usage because of their non-destructive nature. We're relatively used to some non-destructive geophysical techniques, but when it comes to, examining like the human body and some of the ethical concerns around that and ancestral remains and things like that we have, especially in this country, this seems like it could be a game changer.
Well, it is, and it has been, because in the past we've had. So I've just brought up an article I read. It's called the Standardized Protocol for Radiographic and Photographic Documentation of Human Skeletons, and I can't pronounce the surname. Brulhide and Beck and Pelot, probably a French way of saying that. And that's an article is written American, where they did systematic imaging, photographic, radiographic of remains, just as you say, native remains, for reburial. So they captured it. They didn't think to themselves, there is something on these bones. They're doing systematic imaging so that later on down the line, they have the opportunity to examine it. And for these authors, that's what they proposed and what they've used and what I've used as to base some of my research upon.
Okay. Nice. All right. Well, so much more we need to talk about, and we only have one more segment to do it in. So let's take our last break and come back and do that. We'll be back in a minute. You may have heard my pitch for membership. It's a great idea and really helps out. However, you can also support us by picking up a fun t-shirt, sticker, or something from a large selection of items from our TeePublic store. Head over to ArchPodNet.com/shop for a link. That's ArchPodNet.com/shop to pick up some fun swag and support the show.
The Labor Day weekend sale is on at Tanger Outlets. Score up to 70% off at top brands like Nike Factory Store, Crocs, J. Crew Factory, Gap Outlet, and so many more. Refresh your wardrobe with the latest arrivals for less from all your favorite brands this Labor Day weekend. Tanger Outlets, always on trend, always on sale. Plan your trip at Tanger.com.
Hi, welcome back to the Architect Podcast, episode 171. Today we're talking with James Elliott about the work he's doing with X-ray radiography of archaeological remains of various kinds. Now, you've mentioned a couple of times, alluded to, more than alluded to, you discussed a little bit about this mummified head that you were X-raying. And I could see from your website and publications that you've worked with other mummified remains and other human skeletal remains. That's something that I find very, very interesting. And I think a lot of people that have, just passing acquaintances with archaeology kind of understand. We may have seen it in National Geographic or on BBC or something where X-rays are being used on archaeological remains to learn a little about the people themselves, not just about the construction of an axe, for to use your example before, but also about the lives of the individuals that we're looking at. I'm especially interested in what can be learned about pathologies. And I was wondering if you could discuss that a little bit for us.
Yeah, sure. With the mummies, and there's been a lot of people doing mummy scans, you can find out a lot about pathologies with an individual. The whole body scans have been done with CT scans. You can see things like sclerosis, atherosclerosis, so calcification of the arteries. You can see osteoarthritis. You can see pathologies like cancer, and you can do all that by doing this 3D scan. It's not technically 3D, but we're going to call it 3D for simplicity. CT scans are great for when you can't unwrap that mummy because otherwise it's a destructive process. But what about X-rays then? X-rays produce a 2D picture, and they won't be able to get rid of that problem of overlapping structures. But I believe X-rays still have a place in the world. It's more accessible. People are generally going to get a hold of X-ray machine more than a CT scanner. And you can see lots of different pathologies. You can assess for lesions, which cancer lesions. You can assess for metabolic diseases. You can assess for congenital deformations. And you can see something like Harris lines, which I believe, Paul, you know about.
I wouldn't go so far to say I know about them, but I think that that's a very interesting application because, again, trying to understand how people live, that Harris lines for our listeners, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but they're lines visible on the long bones when somebody's growth is interrupted, typically by like malnutrition. And so we could look a little bit about a person's life history directly by examining their bones. Is that that's more or less accurate?
Yeah, that's right. And so Harris lines are interesting because it's not only sort of bad nutrition, but it could also be a point in time where they've had, being really, really very unwell. So where their bodies got to this stage where they can't continue growing as normal, and then they do grow normal, and then you have that line, that deposition. So, and depending on how old you are, depends on where that line is. So some people even go as far as being able to create a formulae where you can work out at what point in their life did they get this biological stress. And this is through X-rays. A colleague of mine did a study where she compared CT scans with X-rays for accuracy to see, well, if we had the opportunity, should we use CT scans or X-rays to look at, to identify Harris lines? And CT had greater visualization of the bones. But in the end, they said, well, really, you can use X-rays, but obviously you do 2 views. Like I said earlier on, you need to do 2 X-rays from 90-degree angles. And so based upon that, I've done some research with, as I said, Adelina Tioaka from Canterbury Archaeological Trust, where we X-rayed the remains of 92 remains to look at Harris lines. But I wanted to find out about what's the best way to do X-rays for bones. And she wanted to find out about the Harris line.
That's great. What other kinds of things can you learn about people's lives and deaths, presumably, by looking at their bones? Can we tell things like age or sex or, well, I don't even know. what could you find?
There are many things you can find out. For a lot of people, that aging someone can be down to sort of visual inspection. But when you get down to children, it sometimes get a bit tricky. So if you did X-rays of teeth or the mandible, you can see unerupted teeth and then use aging methods of predictable eruption methods or dating of the teeth, let's say, getting my words mixed up, to see how old they could be. And we did that for the remains of St. Ainsworth, one of the Anglo-Saxon saints in Kent. They had her remains, but we're not sure how old she was. So we did X-rays, and sure enough, her wisdom tooth, her molar, was not quite erupted. That helped to age her. You can also learn about the bone status from a perspective of density. There's something called photodensitometry, where you can compare how dense the bone is in comparison to an item of known density to work out their bone mineral density. And this is a very old technique, harking back before we had DEXA scans, which is the current gold standard. And then even beyond that, there's something called radiogrammetry, where we can look at the thickness, the cortical thickness of bone to assess for bone loss. So do 2 different things. Photodensitometry for the density of the bone, so osteoporosis, osteopenia. And then we have radiogrammetry for the loss of bone, so determined by the thickness of the cortices. And that's done with mostly in modern practice, the carpal bones, the hand bones. But anyway, I digress.
No, that's great. And presumably you could do this across a number of individuals to get a look at population in a certain time or a certain place to see if there are common pathologies or patterns to their ages or injuries and so on, I guess.
Yeah, there's a guy called Simon Mays, who's an archaeologist in the UK. He's done a lot of studies about cortical thickness, and he's done it across several populations. So that the data is there to look at it. And then there's another one called a lady called Bernadette Manifold, and she did a study about photodensitometry for the skeletal remains of children. And there is a data set there to compare against, but there's so many different variables involved that you have to be careful about comparing like for like. Bones that are in the ground, they can undergo leaching, chemical leaching, where they lose bone density. And of course, you've got the whole variety of sort of taphonomic change, where bones can be damaged. And if there's any bones with cancers where you increase density, or let's say Paget's disease, uncontrolled, disorganized bone growth, you're going to get really dense bones, and it'll just throw your whole hypothesis out the window. So there's lots of things out there that can be identified or diagnosed or confirmed diagnosis with X-rays.
Just on that note real quick, I was wondering, when we think of clinical X-rays and bones that are inside a living human's body, those are, I guess, what I would refer to as wet bones, as compared to bones you would find in the archaeological record, which would be probably for the most part dry bones, unless they're, not deceased all that long ago, and they've still got some, some wetness to them, for lack of a better way to say that. I don't know what the clinical way to say that is, but is there something that you either lose or gain with archaeological remains that are, say, dry versus your standard imaging?
Yeah, they are different density because they've lost their water content. So your imaging approach is different. So in that study I did with medieval and some post-medieval bones from St. Albans, we did that survey of 92 different skeletons, and we had to discover what was the best exposure values, that tube voltage, tube current, to be able to image them successfully. We found that it doesn't matter what size the bone was, that actually a 55 and 5, so 55 kV and 5 MAS, produced the best kind of images for what we wanted. But there are discrepancies there between imaging systems. So yeah, there are differences.
Okay. All right. Well, we are coming to the end of this podcast, but I would be remiss if we didn't mention, especially since we're going to be helping you promote this course here over the Archaeology Podcast Network, but you are a lecturer in diagnostic radiography at Canterbury Christ Church University in Kent, and that's not enough teaching for you. So instead, you decided to, or in addition to, you decided to put together a course, an online course. Tell us about that online course and what somebody can learn from taking that course.
Yeah, sure. So the title of the course is An Introduction to Paleoradiography. And paleoradiography is a term that is used in academia, but not greatly so. And it just sort of intertwines those two concepts, paleo meaning ancient, and then radiography meaning the use of X-rays to produce an image. And within the course, you'll be able to learn about the application of X-rays from a professional point of view, with metalwork, with bones and ceramics to a lesser extent. And I've produced a rich and varied website, training website to do this, and it's been endorsed by the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists in the UK. So it's professional training with something to boost your CV. It doesn't cost too much. It's £50, and I don't know what that equates to, dollars or wherever you're listing in the world, but that gains you 6 months access, and as well as a certificate sent out by email. Now, the interesting thing is that I have actually developed this course alongside undergraduate archaeology students. I invited 100 students from across the world to participate on this online course on my website, paleoimaging.com. And they told me the best way to present this information and to teach them. And the first thing they said was, you've included too much about radiography, which is unusual for a course called An Introduction to Paleoradiography. Honestly, yeah, they all moaned. They said, you've got too much science in this. You need more examples. So yeah, I do. I heavily rely upon open access literature, which demonstrates from the academic community the application of X-rays in there. It's divided into 4 sections, and you can study wherever and whenever you want on your phones, on your tablet, but ideally on a PC with a good screen and a pair of headsets to listen to me in the videos. And you can see the X-rays I take at Canterbury as well.
Nice.
Wonderful. Quick question about that. Does the student in your class, do they have to have access to an X-ray machine to be able to follow along?
No, but it would be wonderful if they could post their pictures and say, look, James, look what I've done today. I'm like, wow, that'd be amazing. No, they don't need to have an X-ray machine. They simply just need to have a PC with the internet and the ability to study for 4 hours, but over a 6-month period. And that's all they need. Yeah. And it's based upon my research, and it's published research. You can have a look at it, try before you buy, let's say. And then there's a little promo video that's available on the website as well.
Nice.
Well, since you mentioned your research in the last few minutes of this episode, is there some research you've been working on lately that you're particularly proud of or is particularly interesting to you that you'd like to talk about? Yeah,
I kind of mentioned it in passing already, but yeah, I did a study with Adelina. We looked at the potential for identifying Harris lines. She really wanted to sort of X-ray, do a skeletal survey for these 92 medieval, post-medieval remains from St. Albans in the UK. So she could find out, A, which bones should we use to identify Harris lines? Because everyone says, let's all use tibia. And I suppose there's a reason for that, because when we looked at all of the bones, we did, 426 bones in all from 2 views, so for the front and the side. And gosh, did it take a while. It took 5 days, even with our digital X-ray equipment. We found out that actually, you know what? The tibia are the best. The tibia, if you're going to do a study to look at Harris lines and you had limited number to resources or time, go for the tibia. The other bones, humeri, radii, and the femur, you're not going to see it as much. And I use that experience as a reflective experience to find out what is the best way to X-ray bones if I needed to, and if I needed to apply that to not only archaeology but forensics. We decided that it was best to have a multidisciplinary team, to have really diligent record taking, and to work methodically. To really work methodically. And there's an open access piece of work which I've done, which is called Radiography of Human Bones, a Reflective Account with Recommendations for Practice. It's open access. You can find it on my website, or I'm sure there'll be a link as well. And to look at, so they did a flow diagram to show how it worked. And there's a list of a bullet point of recommendations at the end. If you wanted to go out and do X-rays of bones for archaeological research, for paleoradiography.
Nice.
One last question then about the need or lack of a need for the researcher to have an X-ray machine themselves. Clearly, you have a pipeline of people bringing you interesting materials to X-ray. Do you have recommendations for people who aren't located in Kent, how they find somebody that can X-ray archaeological materials for them?
I'd say before the COVID environment, I'd say go to Radio Hospital and make friends with the radiographer, or however you term them in your country, because they have different titles. But with the COVID environment, it's been very, very difficult. Even organising to have that CT scan of the head at Maidstone Hospital in Kent, we had to wait until COVID had more or less died down. God, I wish. And we had to do out of hours, make sure there's no compromise to patient services, just that we remember they don't cause a political storm. But for guys out there, I'd say really you want to either approach a university who has equipment and suggest a project, or approach a friendly radiographer or member of staff at a hospital to say, I'd like to do this. And 9 times out of 10, they want to have a bit of enrichment in their life. They want a bit of variety, and they'll probably be very interested and want to do it.
Awesome.
Nice. Yeah, I was wondering about that too. Like, anybody hears this over in the UK and just starts sending you things, like you need to set up a consultancy business, start charging them for it. And I don't know what the cost is of doing that kind of thing.
My love of it is too strong for that at the moment. I just enjoy discovering, researching, and sharing with the world. Nice.
Well, I did look up the cost of your course in US dollars for our US audience. It's about $69, $70. So that's still not very bad at all. A lot of courses are, 2, 3, 4 times that for the value that you get. So this is really good, and would be, super fun to just learn something that you may not, to be honest, use very much, or in CRM archaeology, if you're a CRM archaeologist in the United States, you may not even have the ability to do that. But having that as one more thing in your tool bag, your mental tool bag, is, hey, we found this. I heard about this kind of thing. It might be good. Let's try to find somebody to take a look at this. And it might come in handy, which is why we do this podcast. So, all right. Well, everybody go check out the links in the show notes. Paul, do you got anything else to wrap this up?
Not to wrap it up, just to complicate things. It would be interesting if that course was available for RPA credit in the US, same way that it's eligible for charter credit in the UK. It's not currently, but it might not be a heavy lift if it's been approved in the UK in order to get something comparable in the US. And then it becomes extra added value that makes that $70 US. That stretches it pretty far. It makes it a very good deal.
Yeah, that's something I definitely will look into.
Yeah, and policies may have changed on this. I've looked into that in the past, and they typically require somebody involved with the educational resource to be an RPA. But I don't know if that extends to international courses or something like that, where maybe it wouldn't make sense for them to be part of like a US based, register like this. So who knows? Definitely look into it, because that would be, Paul's totally right. There's nothing like that over here that I'm aware of, and that would be a great addition to some of the resources they have on offer. Okay. Well, again, thanks a lot, James. And we look forward to having you on again sometime in the future. And I hope everybody goes and signs up for your course right now. And if not, you're going to hear about it probably a few more times over the next 6 months as we help him advertise and get the word out for that. So, and if you happen to be with the RPA, get in touch with James and let's see about getting some RPA credit for that, because the more the merrier on that stuff. So again, thanks a lot, Paul, and thanks a lot, James, and thanks everybody. And we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to the Archaeotech podcast. Links to items mentioned on the show are in the show notes at www.archpodnet.com/archaeotech. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com and paul@lugal.com. Support the show by becoming a member at archpodnet.com/members. The music is a song called Off Road and is license free from Apple. Thanks for listening.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to archpodnet.com/members for more info.